Welcome to Monday Morning Marketing with Vaughn and Jules, your armchair CMOs. Jules, how are you?
Doing all right. How about you?
I'm cool. What's up? Anything crazy important happened this week with you? Anything in the world going on you want to talk about?
Nothing, honestly, that comes top of mind. Obviously kidding. Obviously kidding. We're recording this less than a week after the presidential election. So lots has changed for a lot of people, hopefully for the best, although I think a lot of us aren't feeling that way right now. How are you feeling about everything, Vaughn?
Um, you know, it's there's always winners and losers. I mean, not to be beat around the bush. Obviously, it's clear that I'm a loser. Feels like a loser. Um, but gotta keep moving on. Life goes on. We gotta make sure we pick up and do our part to help move things forward. Obviously, besides not having the person that I think should have win, just feeling bad in terms of some of the messages that that person winning sends to the world and people in my community specifically. Like, I think about my nine nieces and what the world looks like for them or what message they're receiving from the world about how important they are or how important they aren't. My mom is, big Kamala fan. She is an AKA from HBCU, just like Kamala. So, her and her sorority, AKAs, put in a lot of work doing voter registration drives in Richmond and, hosting parties to write letters to remind people to vote. And so, my mom even hosted one of those parties after she had neck surgery. So like I'm hurt for her, right? Like I'm hurt for the energy and effort that she put into it. And but also just kind of like just the vibes. Vibes are off. The vibes are off. But we gotta move on.
Yeah, I'm actually trying not to say enough because I'm gonna cry if I say too much. But I'm with you. I'm finding it really important personally in this like very immediate aftermath to try to remain positive and like objective.
Yeah.
Um, so on that note, I guess we can talk about some things that we might expect to change in the sports world over the next however many years. Because obviously this election has really broad implications across every factor of people's lives. Um, but like I said, staying focused on the things that won't make me cry, let's talk about sports stuff. So a couple of things that are on my mind that I've been reading about that Trump's victory could affect um, range from things like the US is set to host both the World Cup and the Olympics in 2026 and 2028. And could those things be in jeopardy given some of his rhetoric if like FIFA and the Olympic Committee decide not to work with the United States, given tariffs, given immigration rules at that time, we'll be having folks in from all over the world. Will that become a problem? So things like that might come up. Um, NIL, which I know you want to talk about in a little bit. There's a couple different like antitrust cases that different sports leagues are facing right now. For example, the USPGA Tour and I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it Live Golf, the Saudi tour?
I think it's live.
They're considering, is it Live?
So yeah.
They're considering a merger, which like right now probably wouldn't go through under Biden's Department of Justice, but might under Trump's. So things like that we'll be considering. Obviously, Title IX has been a big thing that Trump's a big part of Trump's platform, and transgender women's participation in sports. So all of these things will be, things that like the sports world is watching over the next, I don't know how long, maybe it'll be 6 months, maybe it'll be 3 years. Obviously not too many of those have a lot to do with marketing. With the exception of NIL, there's two different antitrust NIL cases right now, which could be ruled on differently or like argued differently or potentially even dropped. Did you want to talk at all about that, Vaughn?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple points of it. And shout out to Amanda, one of my interns from Georgetown, who works at Front Office Sports, wrote an article on right after election, just kind of summarizing just kind of the major differences between the implications of having a Republican presidency and a Republican Congress and how that's going to affect this conversation about student athletes becoming employees or there being a revenue share model. So people tend to think that the Republican control is going to lean more towards supporting whatever the NCAA wants to do, which is not making them employees. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the next few months after Trump takes office. Um, I wanted to get back to just talk briefly about you mentioned the Olympics and the World
Mhm.
Cup. From a marketing standpoint, there's definitely like any negative that possibly could happen with those, not like those getting canceled or getting moved out, like would have so many implications from a marketing and branding standpoint, but also from a revenue generation standpoint for all those cities that are planning stuff. Like I was at Temple in Philly and was on some of the conversations about hosting World Cup at the link. So like that's a big deal. So I'm interested to see how that all works out. I'm interested to see, just I don't know, man. Like there's so many possibilities and there's so I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of people in our shoes are just worried about. Obviously from a sports specific standpoint, that's the world that we live in, but just in general, he's such an unstable, unpredictable
Unpredictable.
person that it could you never know. Like so and with all like I think like we said, to try to stay positive, like maybe the unpredictability means they could pleasantly surprise us and things could go great or better than we expect. So that's what we're hoping for. And all aspects of all those things we just talked about. Because the World Cup and having Olympics here is big for us. There's big marketing implications for all of the endemic and non-endemic brands that are associated with those two things. Got to talk about that every episode.
That's becoming our like thread.
But yeah,
Um, yeah, no, agreed. I mean, all of those things may not tie directly to marketing, but they definitely can have implications. Like if maybe not direct, then second like tie, second layer deep. Um, on a similar note, so we're saying, we're hoping for the best regardless, which is a sentiment that's been shared by a lot of folks who publicly endorsed Kamala. Um, and they're saying, okay, well, we didn't win, but now we're hoping for the best for everyone's sake. We want this to go well. Which brings us to our next topic about I know we wanted to dig in a little bit on how many athletes were really outspoken supporting one candidate or the other this election. I always support an athlete using their platform, or anybody who has a platform using their platform to campaign for something that they believe is for the good of everybody. And so I'm happy to see all these athletes using their platforms. Um, but in particular, a lot of the folks who are uh, supporting Kamala Harris have posted this last week sharing that sentiment that we did. Do you want to dig into some of the specific people who spoke out on either side?
yeah, I know there was an athletes for Harris or athletes for Kamala group.
Mhm.
Had some big names in it, like Steph Curry and Billie Jean King, and had some NFL Hall of Famers in it. But I mean, and I just like you spoke about afterwards, like the only really major person that I saw actually make a statement about that was kind of like felt real, but also felt like kind of authentic was LeBron talking about it with a picture of Zuri and
I
saying,
just got him.
yeah, how he was worried about that. But just overall, right? Like I think that it just kind of when we're framing this conversation from where we're at right now in terms of the endorsements and from a marketing standpoint, I'm looking at it as how simply from that standpoint did we lose, right? Like from a marketing standpoint, Kamala had the dream team. She had the Olympic guys, Steph, LeBron, AD, right? She's got, you know,
Do you
the
want the list?
read the list.
Here's the list.
Read the list.
Here's the list of athletes for Harris. And this is just the co-chairs. This isn't everybody who signed on, but it's Magic Johnson, Billie Jean King, Steve Kerr, Candace Parker, Doc Rivers, Dawn Staley, Chris Paul. There's a few people that I skipped. There's people who signed on but weren't considered co-chairs, but those are some of the biggest names in sports.
Some of the biggest names in sports, right? The dream team. You said LeBron, Steph Curry, Dawn Staley, Magic Johnson, right? And then we look at the other side and we're talking about Harrison Butker and Nick Bosa and Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. Like it doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't make sense. Like, and shout out to my brother Justin Tinsley. Also, he went to Hampton with me and also Georgetown, but he works for ESPN's Anscape and had an article like really just kind of grilling, flaming Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown for being like this year's version of Diamond and Silk, kind of like these caricatures of representing Black people supporting Trump without like any substance at all. Like the article is very goes very deep into detail about how problematic they are as individuals and how them supporting like this just it just doesn't, again, those two, it's like the Avengers versus like I don't know, like somehow Kamala Harris put together the Avengers and Thanos won. Like it just doesn't make sense to me, right?
I'm also an armchair political scientist. I'm not going to dig into much there. I have a poli sci minor, so I kind of know what I'm talking about, but I also really don't. I don't want to like dig into like Democrat strategy and like why all the celebrity endorsements didn't work. I mean, there's like so much I could say. That's not what this podcast is about. um, that said, I noticed I don't know where this is going, but just as you're talking, when you listed the big names supporting Kamala and the big names supporting Trump, it was like a very clear divide of leagues. Like you listed a bunch of NBA players and you listed a bunch of NFL players. And I don't know what that says. Very interesting. Um, anyway,
The one thing
I don't know.
I don't want to say of giving credit, but like something important to note too is like, and you are went to Pittsburgh, right? So having Antonio and Le'Veon Bell, like how much did that help get Pennsylvania, which was one of the most important states in the whole thing? Like maybe that like if that was part of the strategy, I think that that definitely helped. But I don't. I'm looking at that from a marketing standpoint, but taking myself out of it being like a Black person representation because like I think those two guys are. I'm not fans of them and their antics, but maybe it worked. Maybe it worked.
So okay. And I don't think we're gonna have an answer to this. I'm just gonna say that now. Like I don't think we're gonna be able to answer this question, but I kind of want to pose it and have a discussion about it. In 2016, if someone came out in support of Trump and that was believed to mean that you agreed with his racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynistic beliefs, you would kind of get canceled. Like you'd lose a lot of support. You'd maybe become like significantly less brand friendly, probably be less likable to like outside endorsements and sponsorships. And I don't see personally the same thing happening now in 2024, especially given like all of the margins of every demographic group move towards Trump. Like there's broader support all over the place. It's kind of becoming normalized to support him and maybe even draw a line and say I voted for him, but I don't hold those beliefs.
Right.
Do we see these players who endorsed Trump suffering maybe some of those same consequences that they did in 2016? Or do we think we're like in a very different environment eight
I mean,
years later?
I just feel like they're just like I don't know too much about Harrison Butker and Nick Bosa, but I don't recognize those guys as being super brand friendly or having a bunch of partnerships or supporting like any brand partnerships that are like the visibility of them matters. Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown like are irrelevant, other than the fact that they are keeping themselves relevant by doing ridiculous things, including, I mean,
Okay,
you
like
But I'm just
So
saying, like, I don't know if Nick Bosa is losing deals. I don't know if Nick Bosa has any deals, but I think Nick Bosa is also in a position where if he is getting deals, they're probably aligned. So it may not even matter. Like,
that's a really good point. Maybe there will just be like stronger brand alignment as these athletes are like more outspoken about who
right.
they are. Um, I was gonna say like Hulk Hogan, I feel like he wouldn't like the same way you're calling those other four guys irrelevant, which might be like too strong of a term
Look,
for my
Hulk
opinion,
Hogan,
but
he said a bunch of other stuff too. Like he wasn't just supporting Donald Trump. Like, he was he was saying some other things.
but I'm thinking like he was more like I feel like he used to be like in commercials and stuff, no? And like
True.
I don't know. See, I don't know. I don't think we're gonna have an answer for this, but I do think that it'll be interesting to see how that goes because I think that after the way this last election went, I think we are like in a different situation than we were in 2016 and 2020. So it'll kind of be interesting to see like what comes of this.
Right.
Um, completely lost my train of thought. We have nothing else to say about endorsements
Yeah.
and sponsorships. Oh, here's what I was going to say. I did appreciate, and I think it's important that all of these a lot of these athletes posted messages of unity after the election. Like, I think it's important to use your platform. I also think that it's then important to use your platform again and continue to like try to speak for the good of everybody or like message for the good of everybody. So appreciated that nobody was like exacerbating the
Right.
division after like they didn't get what they wanted. So just happy to see all these athletes like using their platforms responsibly.
Yeah.
Um, okay, we brought up
Unity and community is the future. That's it. We're done with
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. um, okay, we mentioned Title IX briefly. Trump ran on a message of women's sports, like protecting women's sports, in a kind of controversial way, but obviously he understood the momentum that women's sports have right now and like the relevance, and he used that to his advantage. Um, so I want to talk about something else that was announced this week. Whoopi Goldberg did like a whole press circuit. She did a bunch of different interviews about her new channel, the AWSN All Women Sports Network, which is going to be airing basically any sport that women play. She said if women play it, it'll be on there. It'll be both live and like replays of things. She said it'll be from like European soccer leagues to uh, WNBA, like tennis, WTA tour. So uh, that's exciting.
Yeah. I thought it was dope to see that it's already whatever partnerships she has with that the network that she's using to get it out is already in other countries, which is it's good that there's already momentum for it. And so I think that's just another way to show like I'm excited about another reason why people are doubling down on it. I think that's the key is the exposure. So, we're seeing that in so many different ways. And I loved it because it was unexpected, right? Like I had no idea that she had this passion for it. She said she tried to play sports when she was a kid. So like to hear that we have this all women's sports network and Whoopi Goldberg is the person who's launching it was like a pleasant surprise, but like really dope to see. But again, like we've talked about this on the first episode, just about how big of a moment women's sports, especially women's basketball, is having. Like they had a TNT kickoff for the start of the college basketball season this week.
Oh, I
Um,
didn't know that. That's cool.
and they had a men's game and a women's game. So it wasn't just only men like what you usually expect for most of the time when the seasons are getting kicked off. So like Dawn Staley, who again we talked about Dawn Staley earlier, is one of the biggest figures in sports. So South Carolina played Michigan in a game. I think the games were in Vegas. But again, to kick off the season, you got the national champs. You got Dawn Staley, who's a big figure in it. It's on TNT, which TNT doesn't usually host college basketball games until um, March Madness time, except for Legacy Classic and some other things that they usually do. But I think that's a big moment.
For sure. And I pulled up I found some specific numbers on this and found an expert to back up my armchair expertise in this. Um, I remember a few years ago, the conversation around women's sports centered around, and it still is centering around like profitability. And it's like, oh, it's not big. We don't invest in it 'cause it's not profitable. We've since realized that's a massive, I'll call it a mistake. I was going to use the word
Miscalculation.
lie, but I'll call it a mistake. Just like
Miscalculation.
an oversight.
Yes.
Um, but the biggest thing that I heard over and over was for women's sports to like really truly grow, it needs to be broadcast. It needs to be pushed out more widely. It needs to be more accessible. Um, I found some numbers, and I want to credit Cheryl Cookie is a professor at Purdue, and she does research in this. And she has a study that said women's sports accounted for 5.4% of all televised sports airtime. This article is from 2023, but it looks like it goes back. I don't know over what time period it is, but it goes back through at least 2019. So up until like 2020, 2023, 2024, women who make up actually I think more than 50% of the population, like 51%, accounted for 5% of all televised sports airtime. And if you remove the 2019 Women's World Cup, that's only 3.5%. Um, so this last year, when there's a lot more happening, I think this number is probably already a little bit bigger. But now with like this really intentional investment coming from somebody like Whoopi Goldberg, who's like been in the media world for such a long time, I think that we'll see that number go up even more. And I think it'll just like continue to like advance an investment in and attention on women's sports.
Yeah. I'm excited about it. I mean, I just there's so many sports in general. So like people will watch it. People love sports. And if we do a better job of telling these stories and having a place for people to go see it live, I think that's gonna be great.
Well, and like all of these media giants and the streaming platforms know now that there's like so much more competition just in what you're going to be watching in general. Like it used to be you turned on the TV and you watched what was on the channel, like the publicly available channel. Now
Yeah.
anybody can watch anything anytime, and so there's increased competition all over, like whether you're going to watch sports or Love Island. But um, I don't actually even watch Love Island. I don't know why that came to me. Um, but anyway, I'm just glad that it's getting the investment it deserves. One other thing I wanted to mention here that I think is showing how wise investing in women's sports is right now, and like how there's a demand for women's sports. I keep getting ads on Instagram this week from ESPN that are promoting a specific women's basketball event. And the first one I saw was Pitt versus West Virginia women's basketball, and I'm a Pitt alum. So they're targeting well. They're messaging the backyard brawl, but it was watch the Pitt versus West Virginia women's basketball game on ESPN Plus. And I found it very interesting. Like I'm already a subscriber from ESPN Plus, so I take everything back I said about their targeting. But um, I thought it was really interesting that they were using a women's event to drive like conversions for their streaming platform. Like if they were going to run a campaign like that, historically it probably wouldn't have been a women's basketball game, college women's basketball game. But I think that just goes to show like they realize it's a strong value prop in 2024. And so does Whoopi. So
Yeah, and it's interesting to see, I mean, without knowing, you can analyze the different options or the different like direction that they were taking that strategy in, right? Like if you're already a subscriber, but they targeted you still because you went to Pitt. So like, okay, maybe you already have ESPN Plus, but they still want to make sure you watch it, right? Like, because they
true.
obviously want to get the
They
numbers
need
up.
viewers.
But
Yeah.
then, but to your point, it's just like now because everyone realizes the value, like maybe a year ago when that same technology and that same strategy was available, maybe or 2 years ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe they didn't spend that money on it, right? Like maybe they're just like, well, we have these games on ESPN Plus. People will watch them if they want to watch them. But like to that, take that point to invest dollars into spend doing a social ad, paid ad campaign to make sure people subscribe and tune in. Like I think that is the key point to that whole conversation is making sure that people know that like people are spending money on it. It's not just the fact that we're hosting the games and have the games on the platform. It's like we are actively putting dollars behind supporting people actually tuning in, which I think that's the key point right there.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. And I mean, my expertise is in performance marketing and like driving conversions. And I can tell you they're not spending those dollars unless they realize that like each click is positive ROI. So that's a great point.
Yep.
Um, all right, that was an exciting update. You wanted to talk about something with Nike.
Do you, Jules, how many people are in the Wu-Tang Clan?
5? What's so hysterical is, well, never mind.
What's this?
What?
What do you say? What you got to say?
No, 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 no. Go ahead.
Depending on who you ask, it's 9, but it technically is 10. But
Okay. I got quizzed and I
so
failed.
basically, the reason we're talking about Wu-Tang Clan and our sports marketing podcast is a really big campaign came out this over the past couple of weeks with a launch, ending with a launch of a sneaker collab that came out this weekend. It's the Wu-Tang Dunk High, inspired by it's a Nike Dunk inspired by the Wu-Tang Clan. It's a yellow and black colorway, which is in line with the theme Wu-Tang Clan and Killer Bees. But the reason why this is important to talk about is the shoe came out back in 1999, and it was part of kind of like this big resurgence of the Dunk shoe that led into the Dunk being a popular shoe in like the early 2000s. Before it had a resurgence again over the last couple years after the pandemic. So in 1999 they put out 36 pairs, so like it was very limited, it was very exclusive, not many people have them, so that scarcity made it become one of the most sought after shoes in the sneakerhead game that people want to get. And so on the I guess it's not really resale, it's aftermarket, but like some of those shoes when people got their hands on them sold for over $50,000. The original ones that came out in 1999. So to have them get re-released is a big deal. But the marketing behind it was amazing, specifically because it's such a good example of a lot of stuff that you see in marketing when we talk about influencers and we're talking about, cultural the thin line between appropriation and partnership, or like how is it relevant. I think that this is a great example of it being done the right way. So it touches and checks off a lot of boxes in terms of, I thought it was unique and kind of cool just because it allows it to activate in a bunch of different levels. So the Wu-Tang collaboration with Nike is one thing. It's a shoe that Nike's putting out. It's got, you know, the RZA, who's the leader of the Wu-Tang, in the commercials and helping to promote it on their social media, multi-channel platforms, like ad campaign. But then it takes to the next level by having the 3 Nova Knicks in it. So then it adds another level to it in terms of indirectly supporting and helping to promote the Knicks, but also capitalize on the excitement that the Nova Knicks, those 3 guys have with this season going into the season this year. So it's not really like, they're not wearing orange and blue. Like we're not talking about the 3 of those guys, Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, and Josh Hart, as being a member of the Knicks team. But it's referenced in the Nike ad where they're talking about, that the 3 of those guys are going to this um, ice cream truck in New York City together because they play for the Knicks, right? Like, in New York is a home of the Wu-Tang Clan. So there's just a lot of different cultural relevant aspects to the whole partnership and just the way that they branded it. It was probably one of the best things I've seen from Nike in a long time. It was very quintessential, like old 90s, 2000 Nike that we loved, in terms of being creative, but also being culturally relevant and having all these different aspects on it. And I think the fact that, one, the Wu-Tang's been around for 30 years, and two, it's a shoe that's already come out. Being able to pull on that nostalgia is always a plus too. I think we all wish we could go back to when we were younger and we had nostalgic about those times. And so like anytime you can do that, that helps as well. So overall, shout out to Nike, shout out to Wu-Tang, shout out to the Nova Knicks, shout out to my boy. I'm gonna do a plug for my boy Lenny, who's a Knicks fan. I actually went. Me and Lenny took the train and we went to the playoff game last year, so I have my towel.
Oh, cute. That's fun.
But I'm not a Knicks fan. I'm not gonna say what team I am a fan of because then I'll be like a super hypocrite. But yeah. But what did you learn today, Jules? How many members in the Wu-Tang Clan? If someone asks you.
9 or 10, depending on who you ask.
Good.
What should I say? What
You
should
should
my
say
take
that. You
be?
should say exactly that because that will know
Oh,
that
okay.
will know that you know what you're talking about. But if
Okay,
they
I want
ask
to
you
add,
to name them, you're gonna be in trouble. If they ask you to name them, you're gonna be in trouble.
you're right.
Just say you know RZA. Just remember RZA, and then you say,
Respect.
but you know Method Man.
Is Method Man and Wu-Tang Clan?
You know who Method Man is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in Wu-Tang.
Okay.
So you know two right there. Bam.
Great. Okay. Can I pivot back to something I'm more comfortable with?
Speaking of towels, right?
What?
So speaking of towels,
No, not yet. Well,
uh,
sorry, I'm ruining everything.
I'm sorry.
Um, I want quickly, you're shouting out Nike and throwing back to the 90s. I know I sent you this week the ad after Saquon Barkley's backwards hurdle with Witness and the Nike swoosh both backwards, which I thought was great,
Mhm.
having no context. I then read additional context that that's a callback to a LeBron ad from the early 2000s, where if you have that context, it made the ad even cooler. So Nike has been doing a lot of this, apparently calling back to their old advertising, and I think it's working for them. I mean, I think week one, our first episode too, we talked about the Anthony Edwards Adidas ad
Mhm.
and how it felt kind of old school.
Yes,
I
I'm pretty sure Saquon is wearing LeBron cleats in that photo.
think he is. I think he is. I think that was part of the tie.
Yes. Yep.
But that, and then the LeBron ad for his cleats or something also used the word witness.
Yep.
Um, so this use of like all of these throwback, like whether or not you remember the original, but just like the kind of, well, A, the marketing's working, but the throwback I think is also working right now.
Shout out to Saquon.
Sorry?
Shout out to Saquon.
Shout out to Saquon. Okay, now speaking of towels, yes.
Towels.
Also, speaking of black and gold, you were talking about Wu-Tang Black and Gold.
Hmm.
Everybody knows the terrible towel. I'm a Pittsburgh girl. I'm not from Pittsburgh, but I am a Pittsburgh girl. Steelers fan. And so I have like probably 5 terrible towels somewhere. Um, but this year, I think this year in particular, we've seen so many of the Steelers away games like really and truly look like home games. And the Commanders knew this was going to happen today. The Steelers played the Commanders at the Commanders. I think they knew it was going to happen. Pens played the Capitals Friday night too.
Yep.
So Pittsburgh people were out in full force this weekend. They saw this coming, and I think their marketing department did something really smart, and they were trying to combat it proactively. And so they handed out these burgundy and gold rally towels for their fans to wave, hopefully to kind of drown out just the yellow towels that you normally see when the Steelers go away. Unfortunately, I watched today. It still looked like a home game for the Steelers. Not only did it look like it, but it also kind of sounded like it. You know, they're showing the crowd noise and everything. But I thought the marketing was really smart, and I love the like proactive approach to and knowing your opponent too.
Yeah, I thought it was a great idea, and I'm always a fan of respectfully and strategically, you know, doing things that are going to get a reaction from your opponent. Not playing it safe. Like I think there's a thin line between trash talking and doing stuff that like that can backfire. Like But this is a smart move that's saying like, hey, we are owning this moment and know what we're up against. And if we win, great. And if we lose, like they did, unfortunately. And I think there was back and forth on Twitter about that. But at the same time, like those are the type of conversations that you have to have and understand like we can't be scared to try something that is gonna help us whether we win or lose. It's gonna show that we're doing our part, right? I think it's easy to play it safe and say, hey, like, well, let's just we don't want to get them upset or like give them any bulletin board material or whatever. Like, no, you gotta stand up and you gotta show your team and you gotta show your fans like you actually like are paying attention and you're actually like trying to deal with something that's actually a big issue. Like I had to deal with this at Richmond all the time when we played VCU and we had plenty of before the renovations that University of Richmond had, there was way too many seats in that basketball arena than Richmond could fill on a regular basis. So VCU people would always be quick to buy tickets for that game. And it would always be like almost 50-50 at some points. But, we had to get creative with how we sold tickets and how we marketed tickets and how we, incentivize our people at University of Richmond to get, their tickets in advance. And so, that's you got to do that. You got to make sure you try to create the best atmosphere for your team and your fans to have a great experience.
I like that you use the word respectfully. I do feel like that's an important caveat. Like you don't want to provoke them.
Yeah.
Um, but to your point, Commanders lost. I did see, and then the Steelers. Also, I think this was really smart. I mean, I know I'm probably a little bit biased, but I think the Steelers social media team did a good job capitalizing on this because then they made posts across like X and Instagram um, with the caption, like, I don't know, some snarky post about the rally towels and how they didn't work and like they still got drowned out by Steelers fans with the caption often imitated, never duplicated.
Yep.
I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I love both. I mean, I think both teams did like a great job capitalizing on this game. Like Commanders have a lot of momentum right now for the first time in kind of a long time because they haven't been great for a while. And
Yeah. And I think
Steelers,
because I think if you sucked, you don't even I think you do it, but you do it low key. Like maybe
yeah,
maybe you don't even do it. Like if they're going into that game 2-7 instead of 7-2, like that's one of those things where you make a business decision and say, it's just gonna be what it's gonna be. But I think considering how important this game was, considering how good the Commanders have been to this point, I thought it was a big deal to make a big statement for a big game. And the game was big. It was a great game. I think they almost won. I mean, they probably I'm not a Commanders fan, but we do like to show love to DC, the DC teams on this show. um,
we
and I,
did.
I have a lot of really close Commander fan friends. But also my uncle and my dad, rest in peace, and my brothers rooted for the Steelers. So like I have a real relationship with the Steelers. But anyway, um, the towel was definitely a big, like I thought it was a good idea and definitely showed that the marketing department at the Redskins and the Commanders, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I apologize. I have to edit that out. I can't believe I said that. At the Commanders did a great job with trying to take advantage of the moment that they had this today, Sunday's game.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of cool stuff happening this week, including that. Lots of not so cool stuff happening this week. I think a good conversation today, Vaughn. We're at the end of episode 3.
Yeah, hopefully people are watching. I mean, we had yeah, I mean, it's cool.
Don't say that.
Hopefully people are watching. But yes, if anything, today today's lesson for everyone that listened is now you know how many people are in the Wu-Tang Clan. And if nothing else, if you didn't take anything away from that, anything else from this episode, I think that's enough.
Okay. Vaughn spoke, everybody. Okay, to your point though, we want feedback. If you are listening and you decide never to listen again, tell us why. If this is your second time or third time listening, tell us why. If one person answers this call for feedback, that would be great.
Comment and say that we are either really smart or we are not.
Shut up. Yep.
All right,
All
Jules.
right.
Well, good to see you as always. I said this last week, but I actually might come to DC this weekend, so I'll let you know.
Okay, sounds good. I might not, I'm not going to be here.
Okay. Well, there. Sucks.
Sorry, I gotta go watch Pitt play.
Tough loss for Pitt to UVA the other day.
Lost two in a row, SMU and then UVA, and I don't know why we lost to UVA. I didn't watch because I was moving, but I'm upset.
SMU is sneaky good. I was just talking to him on
I
Instagram. I
I
got
knew we were gonna lose to SMU.
I got a kid that was at Temple with me, that transferred to SMU who's like balling out on defense. Shout out to Kobe.
I knew we were gonna lose to SMU. Don't know what happened against Virginia.
All right.
All
Well,
right,
good luck.
thanks. Thanks, Talk to you next week.
All right. Talk to you next week, Jules. Take care. Bye, everybody.